Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and these are my pets, George the Gorilla, Collie the Dolphin, and Frank the Sea Turtle. Well, it is that time again, folks. We're back with another review, and we're staying in the year 1994 as we take a look at the movie based on one of the most popular beat-em-up game franchises of all time. I am, of course, talking about the massive success that is Street Fighter. Released by Capcom in 1987, the original Street Fighter was a classic arcade game with a simple premise: fight through your opponents all across the world. The two playable characters, Ryu, a Japanese mixed martial artist, and Ken Masters, Ryu's friendly rival from the United States, went up against a series of 10 opponents in 5 different countries, including Vega and Sagat. While the first game was a huge success, the franchise would evolve into what most know it as with the sequel, which added more characters and expanded on the story. Street Fighter II: The World Warrior is considered by many to be one of the greatest arcade titles and video games of all time, and that's nothing to scoff at. It introduced us to some of the most iconic characters in video game history, such as the beautiful and ferocious Chun-Li and the evil overlord M. Bison. Future titles would involve these characters and many more, while crossovers like Marvel vs. Capcom and the Super Smash Bros. Series involved the most prominent characters from the series. However, Street Fighter II was successful enough to spawn 2 movie adaptations in the same year, the first of which was an anime adaptation, which I have not seen but have heard very good things about, and the second of which is what we are going to talk about today. The movie had a lot going for it, casting action powerhouse Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, a powerful, popular character from the games, and well-respected Puerto Rican actor Raul Julia as M. Bison. And with other big names such as Wes Studi, the film should have been a fun little tournament fighter movie in the style of Enter the Dragon. However, the film's writer and director, Stephen E. D'Souza, decided to make a war movie with the characters from the franchise, akin to, as he put it, a mixture of Star Wars and James Bond. That was a mistake for the film's overall quality, but I'll explain that in a minute. The movie was released in Christmas of 1994, and despite doing well at the box office, critics tore this movie apart. The biggest criticisms of the film came in the form of its tone and dismissal of its source material, although the late Raul Julia's performance as M. Bison was widely praised. Strangely though, apart from the 2009 reboot, which I plan on discussing, it's weird that it has taken so long for a reboot of the movie franchise to arrive, with a version currently being scheduled for release in March of 2026. However, it's been 30 years since the original, and one must wonder how well it was held up. Since it seems you guys have stuck around for this long, I'll tell you. This is the 1994 adaptation of Street Fighter. General Bison, played by the late Raul Julia, the evil dictator of Shadaloo, captures a busload of relief workers and holds them for ransom. Colonel Guile, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, leads an international strike force to invade Shadaloo and rescue the hostages. Along the way, Guile recruits Chun-Li, played by Ming-Na Wen, a reporter and martial arts expert whose father was killed by Bison years ago, 2 young con men, played by Damien Chapa and Byron Mann, and a squadron of others in an attempt to end Bison's rule. Okay, I'm familiar enough with the Street Fighter lore to tell you that this is not a good adaptation. I understand that the story wasn't fully fleshed out, but from what was given, it should have been easy to make this a tribute/homage to movies like Enter the Dragon or tournament fighter movies of the same caliber. It still could have attained the extensive cast and similar tone, but it would have been so much better. Now that being said, I didn't hate this movie. As a matter of fact, I had quite a fun time with it. Sure, it's dated and far from a good adaptation, but the craft is clearly there, and you can tell that they are trying to make a movie out of it. While I'm excited to see a more accurate adaptation, if you're trying to get into Street Fighter and want a good time alongside that, yeah, watch the animated movie first and then watch this one. This movie's pretty entertaining and quite fun at the same time. Now, I believe it's time to dive into the movie and see what works most about it. First things first, holy crap, there are a lot of characters in this movie. Many of the mainstay fighters, as a matter of fact. What I'm going to do is talk about each character, compare them to their game design, and talk about who I would cast for a reboot today. That will take time, but I believe it's worth it. So, let's start with Guile. Now, as much as I think Jean-Claude Van Damme seems to be the best possible casting for Guile, I think his performance is just awful. His line delivery is extremely awkward, and the character doesn't come off as authoritative and commanding as he should. Compared to his design in the games, I think he looks pretty good when compared to the counterpart from that series. They got a lot of details down, especially with the tattoo of the American flag and the muscles. His hair is a little more realistic in the film, but that's a given, and it makes more sense. Now, as far as who could play Guile today, I believe that since his personality is very commanding and tough, getting a tough guy actor would be the smartest move, and based on some of his more recent roles, I think John Cena is a great choice. Moving on to Chun-Li, aka the love of my life, I've had a crush on her for a very long time. Sorry. Ming-Na Wen is perfect casting. Not only does she look like Chun-Li, but she nails the personality down to a T. Now, granted, her being a reporter at first didn't make sense, but once she was in action, I was more than happy. She sports a very similar outfit to the game version of Chun-Li, but my only gripe with that is that it's red in the movie as opposed to the blue, which I much prefer. But that's a minor complaint. Finally, as far as who could play Chun-Li in a modern adaptation goes, Meng'er Zhang would make a great Chun-Li based on her performance in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which shows she can fight. Moving on to Ryu and Ken, aside from stupidly mispronouncing Ryu's name several times in the movie, I loved seeing these two have comedic interactions, and watching them fight was also entertaining. They also sport the best looking costumes when compared to their game counterparts. Seriously, you could not ask for anything more aside from Ryu's headband. As for who I would cast as our boys in white and red, Andrew Koji, based on his role in Snake Eyes, where he was a serious and skilled fighter, would make an excellent Ryu, and Glenn Powell, for his excellent comedic timing, would make a great Ken. As for the other duo, Balrog and Honda were pretty funny, especially when it came to their comedic timing, but they weren't too interesting. Their designs, while not implemented into their costumes until later, are pretty spot on, especially Balrog's. As for who I'd cast today, for Balrog, I'd cast John Boyega just to give him another chance at franchises, and for his personality as Finn in The Force Awakens, giving him the tough guy attitude, and Cooper Andrews as Honda, mainly for his laid-back personality, and that's about it. As far as Blanka goes, he's a composite character between the original Blanka from the games and Carlos, who is Guile's friend that is killed in action. And in this film, Carlos is conditioned to being the perfect soldier by M. Bison and turns into the green monster we all know. I don't mind the change, but it does make Blanka seem less animalistic in his nature, which should have been a given since he's supposed to be a feral beast. Also, for the praise I give his design for at least being somewhat accurate to the game, I think that it just doesn't work practically. For the modern movie, he needs to be a CGI character through motion capture, and Terry Notary could pull that off. As for Killer Bee, aka Cammy White, and Thunderhawk, I'm of the opinion that Kylie Minogue is much like Van Damme in this film, very awkward in this role, which is down to direction and very awkward British accent, but mainly direction. Also, Thunderhawk is supposed to be Native American, which they sort of allude to, but it's not exactly clear. Their designs aren't that great either. Cammy's very dynamic look is just not present aside from the hat and the shirt, and Thunderhawk just has one bandana. These two were sort of letdowns in that regard, and for a future adaptation, I think Lily James and Martin Seinsmeyer would make excellent versions of these two characters. There's also Dalzim, who's a doctor in this version and only briefly resembles his game counterpart, but he's also kind of nothing in this movie. If I were to cast a modern adaptation, I think Ben Kingsley could offer a down-to-earth, wise, and skilled fighter. But there's not much more that I can say otherwise. Okay, now let's talk about the bad guys. For Vega and Sagat, I think for side villains they were pretty entertaining. It was kind of disappointing that Vega spent so much time without his mask, but his physical prowess was extremely important to nail down as well, and they succeeded. Sagat only needed to be a mini-boss for Ryu and Ken, seeing as how he was the main antagonist in the first game, but I think Wes Studi is very entertaining in this role. Design-wise, Vega, when the mask and the claw are on, looks perfect, and Sagat, when without his shirt, looks pretty good too. He's just not as muscular. For modern adaptation, I think I'd cast Laz Alonso as Vega and Dave Bautista as Sagat. For the two henchmen under Bison, Zangief and DJ were great. You have two very entertaining characters, one with a fiery attitude, and the other who's a silent brute who drops some funny jokes here and there. Their designs are a lot simplified when compared to their game designs, with Zangief looking more accurate to the games by the end, but I prefer the way the game handles their looks. For modern casting, Thor Bjornsson would make an excellent Zangief based on his height and physical prowess. Yes, Eddie Hall looks like Zangief, but he's too short. And Barkhad Abdi would do wonders for DJ. Finally, of course, we have the best performance in the entire movie with Raul Julia as M. Bison. He cared way too much about giving a great performance, and M. Bison, who is naturally threatening no matter what, seeing as he is a godlike character and dictator, means something here. His natural frightening charisma, his pure evil plans, and his psychotic energy make Bison one hell of a villain, and it will definitely be hard to top Raul Julia's performance in a future adaptation. He nailed it with everything, including a great version of the costume. If I was going to pick anyone to play a modern Bison, I think the actor with the most potential is Jason Scott Lee, who looks intimidating once he gives a death stare, and would be a menace to battle. Regardless, Bison is the best part of the movie's characters, though Chun-Li, Ryu and Ken and Zangief do come pretty close. Okay, that was a lot, but I haven't had to talk about 15 well-known characters like this in a very long time, so don't judge me. But no better time than the present to change that, am I right? Now, let's move on to the effects and production design. I think the country of Shadaloo, even though that's the name of the criminal organization led by Bison, looks great. It reminds me a lot of Vietnam from Apocalypse Now, with its warm environments occupied by soldiers, nighttime entertainment in tents, and of course, Bison's fortress covered in red, gray, and black, signifying the true evil holding the country hostage. That set is probably my favorite part of the whole movie's look, since it gives it an identity. As for the score, it was composed by Graham Revell, whom I've never heard of before, but his work in this movie was pretty good overall. It doesn't stick with the game sound, but rather does something unique and more traditional, which made me take it a lot more seriously. That said, I would have liked to hear some familiar themes in here, but maybe the next adaptation will give us that. Finally, we have the action scenes. Some of the fighting is slow, which bothered me, but once we see Ryu and Ken start fighting, that's when the movie is at its most interesting. The best fight of the movie to me was the final fight between Ryu and Ken and Vega and Sagat. It was fast-paced and felt earned, hence why I found it the best. That said, Guile's throwdown with Bison was also fun, especially towards the end. So yeah, Street Fighter is not a bad movie. It's quite entertaining in many ways. Sure, it's not aged well in some areas. A lot of the performances are kind of standard, some aren't great, and the action wasn't all that special, but I definitely found it fun and something I can find myself watching again. This movie, surprisingly, gets a 7 out of 10. It's a fun movie that I recommend if you want something fun. Okay, that took way too much time than I believed it would, and I had a lot to say. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments on the movie below, and tune in next week when I take a look at not one but two movies based on yet another beat-em-up. You can tell the content was very thin. With that said, my name is Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap. See you next week.